And after some technical difficulties, we're finally here live. Welcome, everyone. It is Friday. Maybe not after all these technical difficulties. It is Friday, February 25th, 2022. You are tuned into Mike Saves Hockey on YouTube, twitch.tv/full press coverage, twitter.com/full press NHL, Facebook full press coverage, full press radio network, the full press app, and wherever you listen to your shows. It took like 10 minutes to fix everything, but we're here. It's Mike, joined this week by my FPH Weekly co-host, Chris Wassel. Chris, how are you doing on this lovely Friday afternoon?
It's beautiful. The sun is out. The ice is melting. Yeah, the ice is melting. Yeah, somebody screwed that one up. We were supposed to only have rain. We ended up with like a third to a half of an inch of freezing rain overnight. And then it just melted like nothing. It was like it didn't exist. The sun came out. It was gone. It is all good. Now we just have to spend more money.
Right. And we have today, before we get into today's show, like, I'd be remiss to not mention the things going on over in Ukraine, in Europe. To be honest, the last couple days, due to knowing people who are from that region, having friends whose parents are from that region, it is not a good time right now. Obviously, our thoughts are with everyone in Ukraine and this disgusting situation that we're in. The past nearly 48 hours have been personal. I mean, not as tough for the people over there, but personally been tough for me to even want to do my normal day-to-day work or my job or anything like that, solely because it just feels trivial to sit here and talk about a sport or talk about a video game or whatever I happen to be writing about it at the time we're talking about. So our thoughts are with everyone, and we're going to try and give people an outlet to break away from things and, talk about something fun, which is money here, because this week is all about.
Hey, hold on. We have our official prop here. Wait a minute. Let's do this the right way. How many? Let's see. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if we have. How many Benjamins do we need this week? Let's see. Hold on a second. I think appropriately, since the cap is around 81 million or so, give or take. I mean, we do have a nice spread of $81 here. So it's
yeah, there we go. Perfect.
It's on a scale. I mean, it'll work.
We are talking about money today and the Nhl salary cap problem that needs to be fixing. And obviously, the show's all about fixing things and saving things and making the league better. And one way to do that is salary cap, because, again, if you're a fan of a team that circumvents the cap or finds loopholes, then great. I personally still have no problem with it because the system's there, but I do think the system needs to change in a major way. And what stems all this, we'll jump right into it. Tampa Bay doing what they can and basically going in with a team well over the salary cap into the playoffs and riding that to a Stanley Cup championship 2 years in a row. And now this year with Vegas and Jack Eichel, rather than what we all thought of, like, oh, Vegas is going to have to move contracts, they're going to have to trade somebody. No, they're just putting players on IR and long-term IR and like Mark Stone, and they'll figure it out down the line when he's healthy soon. Or they keep him out until playoffs, and then he comes back and he's fine because the NHL allows that type of stuff to happen. So, how do we fix the salary cap, which it sits currently at $81.5 million? is the cap limit. It went up $1 million from last year. The league, based on what they've said, expects to be debt free from the debt to owners of the pandemic, from shutting down, going into the bubble, having no fans by the end of the 2023-24
season.
Which means likely we're not going to see a major increase in the cap. They're going to be using a lot of the the new TV right deal money to pay that debt to owners and then catch up down the line. But that doesn't solve any of the issues right now, which in a big way is teams circumventing. So, Chris, what comes to your mind first on ways to get around this?
I mean, look, the most obvious way to get around it is what we've been talking about for the past few years, and that's your star player magically has an injury that takes a good deal longer than it should to recover. We've seen it, quote unquote, with Nikita Kucherov. We saw it to a lesser extent with Steven Stamkos. And we're now seeing it with Mark Stone, although there is some reports that legitimately his back is foobar, and it just needs to be shut down. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it does seem strange that Vegas had a sort of karma with another injury that has made their salary cap moot to a point. So go figure. Maybe there is some sort of Murphy's Law that hits hockey. But if you look at some of the numbers, for example, and this is where it gets fun. Okay, teams that are slightly over the salary cap. Oh, by the way, the Flyers, amusingly enough, have $4,400 in cap space. I just thought that would be extremely amusing to mention. But are technically over even their projected cap space because they have 9 players, 9 on LTIR. By the way, Montreal has 8, just for those scoring at home. And that's the main way to get around this. It doesn't take much, and you can go pretty much as high as you want to. I mean, look, right now, Montreal's technical projected cap hit, Mike, is over $93 million. Unless I checked it pretty bad.
Yeah, and you have, which is higher than Vegas is.
Higher than Vegas.
Which is at 91. And yeah, Montreal, I mean, they have 7 players on IR. They have Shea Weber on, they're only one on long-term IR. Then they have Carey Price in the player assistance program.
Which he's not coming out of.
No. And it's one of those things of, it's insane that a team they're that cap strapped and they are at the bottom of the league. I get all these injuries, but even if these players come back, I mean, they still have to make moves and they're still probably sitting at the bottom of the league.
Yeah. And obviously they're not the only team that is over the cap like this. I mean, if you go from a technical sense, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. If you count Philly in a sort of wackadoodle technical sense, 12. Oh, by the way, Philly only has an active roster of 21 players, just so everybody knows out there. That's why they sort of have cap space, but really don't.
Yeah, and yeah, they the really don't thing. It's kind of a, you look at these teams at the top of their cap hit, and it's Montreal, Vegas, Tampa Bay, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, Chicago, Dallas, and Philly. And then Washington round out the top 10. Seeing teams that aren't making the playoffs in that mess, or likely not making the playoffs, makes this situation even worse to me. Because we know they're loading up on contracts to help other teams or whatever it may be. And it just shows when teams are, the salary cap is in a situation like that where the worst teams are still, I mean, the team that's currently at the bottom of the league standings, again, is Montreal, and they're at the top. It just shows that if you're the league and you don't think that's a problem, then I don't know what you're looking at. Like, and then you look at Vegas and Tampa, who are right behind Montreal, and they're the two teams that have found ways to get around this and find loopholes and circumvent everything. And again, the league, you look at it and you don't think that's a problem. I don't know what you're looking at. Like, and there's ways to fix this. Like, we've talked about it on Tuesdays. We've talked about a soft cap, like the NBA, and a luxury tax and things like that. But to me, there's other ways around this to make teams pay for what they have to do, or what, not what they have to do. Make teams pay for the decisions they've made. So whether it's putting cap penalties, all right, you circumvent the cap into the playoffs, well, that cap penalty carries over to the next season. Or here's something, and I don't know what your thoughts on this one. Maybe make it make a minimum games played for the season type of thing a rule, to where you have to play at least an X amount of games in the regular season, not for the team that you're on because trades and things like that, but X amount of games for team in the regular season in order to be eligible for the playoffs, so that it's like, well, he played on the team. It's tough for you. You see the Nikita Kucherov thing, like he was on long-term IR for the entire season and activated just in time for the playoffs, and he was allowed to play. And his contract wasn't added to the roster because he was on long-term IR because cap doesn't go towards playoffs. It goes for the regular season. So what are your thoughts on something like that, like a minimum games requirement?
It may get to that point. I don't think it's going to anytime soon because the league just seems hell-bent on doing it this way.
And CBA, would the players go for it?
Yeah, and you're going to have to get them to agree on something that they may not necessarily want or are able to stomach, especially for some players who are legitimately been injured and haven't been able to play for, say, a full season. That's going to cause a problem inevitably. Now, there's other wackadoodle ways around that they can get around this. They could increase the overages a little bit. I mean, you have that already. Some teams are in their cap mess because of all these silly salary cap bonuses, and somebody thought it would be a great idea to have a signing bonus on a contract that's 8 years and $72 million, and the $64 million is her signing bonus, and and then the other $8 million is for performance bonuses, but those are only paid out on 2 years of the contract, but it can't be front or back loaded, so it's in the middle. The NHL has sort of reaped what it sowed here, in the sense that every solution now for this cap has another problem that can almost be as bad or worse than what one is trying to correct.
One solution I saw someone throw out, I can't remember who I saw throw it out on social media, was the idea of, and this is like with teams, bad teams who don't, that what they're doing, they're rebuilding, they're not going to spend to the cap. The idea of trading cap space to a team that needs it. It's like, you can't go over. It's a hard limit. You literally can't go over. LTIR won't help you in certain situations. Okay, right. We'll reach out to, I don't know, like if we use a real life example, reach out to the Sabres, who have $41 million in cap space currently. What? And you go, if you're, say, for example, you're Philly, and you're fighting for a playoff spot or whatnot, or you're in the playoffs, but you literally have no space to keep your player who's coming back from long-term IR that can really help. You reach out to Buffalo and be like, hey, can we trade for $10 million of your cap space? We'll give you an X round pick or whatever. It could speed up rebuilds because it'll allow those rebuilding teams to get at more assets for cap space they're not using. But it also, I feel, could be on the other side of things, it could negatively impact the system where it's like, all right, you have these perennial teams that are always at the bottom, and maybe they just want to constantly sell cap space. And the team I look at is Arizona.
Who's doing it already, just in a different, way different way to accumulate assets.
Duke and Pronger and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, they did Pronger, Daxuk, sheesh. There's like a laundry list.
Like the contract for Pronger was acquired by Arizona while he was working for the NHL in the office. Like that to me shouldn't be allowed. That type of stuff is where it's like that's over the top, should not be allowed. Where I feel more of a stink should have been raised on that than anything. But the idea of trading the cap space is intriguing. Again, that to me is a mess. One of the other ideas that I thought or I saw was a single player salary cap. So you can have X amount of players get up to this amount, but once you use that limit, so for example, like 12 mil, you can have one player as a 12 million a year player. The next, you can have one player as a supermax player type of thing. The NBA has it. It seems to work out in their favor. Granted, again, NBA rosters are a lot smaller. Money's a lot bigger because of that. When you're getting 7th, 8th, 9th men getting 17 million a year. But a supermax type idea, I feel, could also help with this. And in my mind, increase possible parity, which we do really have in the NHL, because there are cases where, I mean, you're not seeing teams win the championship every single year. Like you had Pittsburgh in 16 and 17, but before that, you had Detroit. So it's one of those situations of the Supermax could help increase the amount of different teams that are in the finals or winning the championship year over year, even though you still see the same teams in the playoffs. But you always get that feeling that any team can win a round once they make it.
Yeah, and right now you kind of have it, given what has happened this year. Unless you're Toronto, of course, you have no hope.
You don't win a series.
You just don't win. But all joking aside, I mean, there's a lot to fix, and the biggest part of all of this is that one of the kind of like underlying things that the NHL was trying to do, and I know they were trying to do this in California, where they were trying to get some of their debt absolved.
Yeah.
Nope. California basically struck it down yesterday. They said that
Not surprising.
And I get why the NHL tried this, because let's face it, California has been one of the states that, for a lack of a better term, has no common sense when it comes to restricting anything, except maybe for property taxes. But other than that, it still was something that was a long shot at best. And what this would have done, basically would have freed the NHL up to go into other states, do the same thing, and basically get what you would call not more like cap solvent sooner than the 23-24 season. That was their hope, at least get a little bit closer, so that they could increase the salary cap and then maybe try to work around some of these quote unquote circumventions.
And I feel like, again, I think about the players, and they're not going to obviously go for it. Everything we're talking about is all hypothetical based on the CBA, obviously. And we're not anywhere near a new round of negotiations for the CBA. Granted, that's coming soon enough, but we're not there. Especially with the new TV deal rights. But it's one of those, like, if you are the NHL and you're looking at, like, say they decide we want to do something, we need to do something. Is there anything, and that this is where I struggled when thinking about this week's show. Is there anything that the league could realistically put into place? Probably not this year, but in time for next season to fix some of fix the leaks in a broken system.
There's gotta be some kind of way, Mike, to at least limit the amount of players that you can put on the LTIR. Because, to have 9, Montreal has 8. Let's see here. All right. Now, according to my complex math, which sometimes gets a little fuzzy, right now, Philly has 9. Montreal has 8. Edmonton has 7, by the way, which is surprising enough. They all actually do not lead the league in listed injuries or players on IR. Take a guess Sabres, who leads? Yep, the Sabres do.
I think 10, 11, 10.
Yeah. 10 that are listed currently. So now let's add in a few teams along the way too.
And like 12 of them, 12 of those 10 players are goaltenders.
Yes, they're all goaltenders. Look, Columbus is not too far behind. Don't worry. We've heard that another goaltender has been injured from Columbus. No, I'm kidding. But okay, so you have Winnipeg, who has 5 players in LTIR. Vegas has 5 as well. Chicago has 6, like we mentioned. Dallas surprisingly only has 2, although I count Radulov as a third player playing injured. He's on his own version of LTIR. Now, what do you limit the amount at? The question becomes, do you limit the amount and the amount of players? Or do you do one or the other? I think you almost have to do both at this point.
I feel like, you have to do both.
It can't be one or the other. And I think that's kind of what the NHL tried to sort of half-heartedly do. And they were like, well, and then it just became the Wild Wild West. When Tampa Bay said, oh, well, I can just put them on here. At the end of the season, we come off, and everybody has no cap. The other consequence is having a cap for the postseason. Now, that's something that cannot be done this year. Probably can't be done until the next CBA.
Yeah,
but that would be interesting to set. Maybe not the same amount cap. So let's say it's 81.5 now. Say you could go 10% above the cap for the playoffs.
That's it, yeah.
And call it a number there. Maybe a little bit less. It's a number that both sides would have to come up that feel comfortable. And something keeps bugging me that even 90 million is going to be a bit too much. But again, I'm only so good at math, and my multiplication tables start to get screwed up after a while. So all often gets forgiven. But from what I've been told from league people, that is something that is being looked at least. Whether it ever sees the light of day, Mike, is another question entirely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't think it ever sees the light of day, to be honest. It's a weird thing. Like, one of the thoughts, too, that I'd like to see, and it kind of goes against my idea of trading salary cap in a way, but I do want to see an end to teams being able to trade players that are on long-term IR. Like, when the Sabres, for example, traded earlier in the year, they picked up Boychuk. Mm-hmm. They grabbed Johnny Boychuk, who had 1 year remaining on his deal, 38 years old, knowing, he's done. But done. Just to park him on IR to fill up cap space to get to the floor. That
should never be allowed.
Needs to stop, because that's how you bail out teams that put themselves in cap hell. And if I'm the league, no, I don't want to bail out teams that put themselves in cap hell. I'd rather have teams that put themselves in cap hell have to trade players that are actually playing it on the roster, because one, that builds excitement for the league. It builds excitement for the fans, but it also improves another team. And to me, it's like, all right, you mentioned the NHL reaping what they sow. This is a case where the NHL has to reap what it sows, but the teams don't for some reason, and that's where I have the problem. Again, good on the teams for being able to take advantage of a broken system, but the system sucks. Like, it's not like I approve of the system. And yeah, trading injured players, trading injured contracts. I go back to the Datsuk stuff where he retired, went to Russia, but they were able to
Yeah.
still trade his contract to clear cap space. Should not be allowed to happen. Pronger, career over, able to trade his contract. This type of stuff should not be allowed to happen. And I feel like that should be part of number one on the list of how to fix this problem.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, this is one of the biggest problems that we've seen over the past several seasons. And yes, Arizona is a principal contributor to this, and they're still doing it because they can. It's like a bad Apple Jacks commercial. They're doing it legitimately because they can, and they keep doing it. Their management has made no secret that they're not going to stop because they, quote unquote, have no choice. Well, part of that, you do have a choice. It's called don't have ownership. That's a bunch of racists that
Yeah.
can't get out of its own way, literally. And town councils know this, and it's caused an immense problem with not just one town, but at least 3 that I know of. I mean, there's a common sense balance to this. Now, look, there's other teams too that are kind of sort of one and the same in this too. Yeah, there's teams that don't weaponize their cap space that are just as bad and complicit in a way. Like I'll say it, the Devils. Devils are a golden example. They don't use their cap space properly.
No.
It's been well known. And okay, so you still have guys on the, I mean, look at here's another one. Imagine having coach, here's one for you. Penalize certain teams. Penalize teams that have fired too many coaches.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I've seen it like even in other sports like the NFL where there's like 3 coaches still under contract from like.
I mean, look at the Sabres.
1,
They
2,
went
3.
from Balsma to
Yep.
what's his face,
Kruger.
Housley to Kruger, and they're still paying.
Kruger. They're still paying both, right? I think
They're,
Bosma
they're
is
paying
on this last.
Balsma, Kruger, and Housley still.
I was right. Wow, I thought it was 3. I mean,
Yeah.
What you're paying them. Hey, that should count against the cap. You want to
Yeah,
start.
if
You
you
want to
fire.
start. You want to start really penalizing teams. Okay, you want to dumbly pay your management X amount of money. There's an overage. Put it on the cap.
But
I mean,
to be fair on that, my problem is that gives rebuilding teams an out to not put out a competitive roster because, like, well, if we fire this coach, that we know that we're getting closer to the cap floor.
yeah. I mean, this is this is where you just sit there and go, is there an amenable solution that works for everybody? And it may be something where we're kind of inching this along, and again, we wind up 1 or 2 loopholes behind come the next CBA. We fix this one with the LTIR, and then inevitably we're going to come out with something else that we're behind on.
Yeah, and where I come in on that, the idea of coaching, management, firing, counting. What about, and this is one of the last things we'll talk about for this week, is what about the idea of if we're going to do this for the playoffs, you have a cap limit on the roster per game. Like before the game, you have to submit your 20-man roster, whatever, and that roster has to be cap compliant.
Now the question becomes, what do you set the cap at?
Set the cap at the regular season. So you take the 81.5 million.
It's interesting.
It currently is, and then before each game of the playoffs, that roster has to be submitted, and it has to be cap compliant. Not and right down to the dollar. It can't be $1 over. So if you want to play Kucherov
There's
in that
no
situation,
10% grace rule here.
no, if you want to play Kucherov in that situation, well, guess what? Guess you're playing with a less than 20-man roster.
You know what? It's something that could be explored. I mean, at at some point the NHL has to get a hold of this, and there's a part of me that sometimes thinks they don't want to be perfectly honest. And this would at least be one way to start to get a foothold, because you're either going to have to keep this hard cap, or like we mentioned before, things like the supermax, a mid-player exemption, things like that, you're going to have to go softer and softer. It can't stay where it's at, unfortunately. Even with this sort of flat cap moratorium that we're under until we become debt free or whatever other problem comes in. There has to be some sort of solution, and holding status quo right now is not working.
Yeah, and speaking of the status quo, what doesn't hold the status quo? We here at Full Press Coverage. That is going to do it for this week's edition of Mike Saves Hockey, our fun little Friday half-hour show twice a month, every other week here on Full Press NHL until schedules clear up. Then we go back to the weekly. But you can follow Chris at Chris Wassel DFS on Twitter. You can follow me at Mike Straw Media. You can, of course, tune in every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on Full Press Coverage for Full Press Hockey Weekly with myself, Chris, and Jim Behringer, where we talk about everything from the world of hockey, take your questions, and I go on some stupid rant for the week. But in the meantime, we want to thank you for tuning in. Stay safe. Again, our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine, and we will see you